Welcome to Morningstar Christian Chapel. If you're watching on YouTube, please remember to hit that subscribe button, like button, and the notification bell so you can find out when we go live or we post a new video. And be sure to leave a comment about what God has shown you in this message. Thanks, and enjoy the study.
In Jeremiah chapter 29, Jeremiah the prophet is instructed by the Lord to write a letter to those captives that have been taken to Babylon and to tell them about God's glorious long-term plans for them, but also for their near term, for the next 70 years, what his plans for them would be. We've told you for the last couple of weeks there were three major deportations of the Jews out of Jerusalem during the world reign of the Babylonians. The first took place in 606 BC. We are told in 2 Kings, I think chapter 24, that 3,023 nobles were taken in this first deportation. They were the rich kids, the well-trained kids, the ones who had been well-educated. Daniel was among that first group. In 596, or about 10 years later, the armies came in again and they just dragged off tens of thousands of captives. There were a lot of skirmishes. Some people died. But then they left again with orders to act a certain way, and when the government there did not, in 586, they came back and they leveled the city. They stole everything out of the temple, and everyone else was dragged off to captivity. Some were able to flee, most were not, and the only ones left behind were the handicapped, the incapacitated, and all. And so three overthrows, if you will, but the 70 years parted with that first invasion in 606. This chapter was written in 596. So it was written 1 year after the second and before obviously the third deportation, where already thousands of folks were living in captivity. The word from the Lord to the people through Jeremiah, to the captives, were basically to settle down. If you look just a minute in verse 4 of this chapter, it says that the Lord, thus saith the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, to all who have been carried away captive, whom I have caused to be carried away from Jerusalem to Babylon, build your house, dwell in them and plant gardens and eat the fruit. Take wives and beget sons and daughters, and let take wives for your sons and give your daughters to husbands, so that they may bear sons and daughters, that you may be increased there and not diminished, and seek the peace of the city where I have caused you to be carried away captive. Pray to the Lord for it, for in its peace you shall have peace. Then the Lord said down in verse 10, or verse 9, excuse me, verse 10 is okay. For thus saith the Lord, after 70 years are completed in Babylon, I will visit you, perform my good word towards you, and cause you to return to this place. So it's going to be a while. You're not getting out. You're there for 70 years. Pray for the city. Keep yourself busy. And then have this promise to look forward to. In between those verses, verse 8, thus saith the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, and do not let your prophets and your diviners in your midst deceive you. Don't listen to their dreams, which you cause to be dreamed, for they prophesy falsely to you in my name. I have not sent them. And so the very false prophets that had been a major cause of them being able to go into captivity begin with misleading the people. They were still speaking and people were still listening, and they have to be told again to turn away from these folks. So Jeremiah now is asked by the Lord to write a letter to the many that are in captivity, that they should settle in and grow and be strong and wait for the Lord 70 years. We told you Daniel was the first one taken in 606. He was probably 14, 15 years old at the time. In Daniel chapter 9, he is in his mid-80s when he says in chapter 9, verse 2, I was reading the book of Jeremiah, and I realized that the time for our captivity was almost up. He did the math. And then he said to the Lord, what do you want me to do in bringing the people back home? I know it'll be 2 more years and we're going home. What should I be doing? And here, a guy in his mid-80s is going, what do you want me to do, Lord? To which I would have said, well, just relax, Daniel, you're 80-something. But Daniel was just willing, right, and ready to go. But he got that number and assured again of it here. So God's word to his people in captivity, to a people that were, they ran the world at the time, they were a world power, was just live your best life. Plant your house and your crops, have your kids, continue in marriage, and be sure to pray for your captors. Because if there's peace amongst them, there'll be peace for you. And you should know, at least from history, that the Babylonians treated the Jews really well, the ones that were able to make it there, the 700 miles away or so. But Jeremiah urged them to not be troublemakers, but to be peacemakers. And you could understand how a nation, dragged away like that in handcuffs and in POW camps, so that they would literally, have the hardest time doing what they were told. And yet God said, "This is be to your peace." I mean, these folks had lost everything. Lost their homes, lost their lands, lost their possessions. Some of them lost family members. A lot of people weren't doing what the Lord said, giving up. There were folks who lost and were separated from family because of their planting in the different cities and all through Babylon. And then they lost their freedom. You can go read in Psalm 137, which was written there in Babylon by some of the worship people, if you will. But here are some of the words. "By the rivers of Babylon we sat down and wept when we remembered Zion and hung our harps upon the willows in the midst. And those who carried us away captives said to us, 'Sing a song.' And those who plundered us requested mirth, saying, 'Sing us one of the songs of Zion.' But how can we sing the Lord's song in a foreign land?" And they were distraught. And they were in captivity. So this isn't an easy word to hear, but Jeremiah's been right all along, and they should maybe have embraced it now. But he has the unenviable task of convincing a people who are in captivity that they were right where they should be by the will of God. This was God's will, that they were now 700 miles away from home under the authority of a different people, a wicked nation, and the Lord would allow them to stay there till they learned that idolatry was not good. There was only one God, and it was him. But Nebuchadnezzar was very kind to them, all things considered. And the next guy, Cyrus, who would be the head, the first king of a new empire, would let them go home. So Jeremiah, a couple of things. He didn't want the people to panic. He didn't want them to come to the wrong conclusion about what God was doing. God had warned them about this for 325 years. And so, they brought it upon themselves, but they still needed to know that God hasn't forsaken them or left them, and that he's still doing good things if they would just look to him. So here's what verse 11 says. "I know the thoughts that I think towards you, saith the Lord, that are thoughts of peace and not of evil, to give you a future and a hope. When you call upon me and go and pray to me, I will listen to you. And you will seek me and find me when you search for me with all of your heart, and I will be found by you, saith the Lord, and I will bring you back from your captivity, gathering you from all of the nations from all of the places where I have driven you, saith the Lord, and I will bring you to the place from which I have caused you to be carried away captive." God assured them of his involvement in their lives at the most difficult time of their life, in this captivity that they had to endure to learn to know the God who loved them better. But there's a lot of things I think you can take away just in these few verses, starting in verse 11, where the Lord said, "I know the thoughts that I think towards you." And you should look and see that all of these words for think and thought are in the present tense. Because one of the things that you should know, if you don't, is that God thinks of you constantly. In fact, there is never a moment in your life that God stops thinking about you. Other folks might forget about you, but he does not. These are ever-present terms. There is not a second in your life that you are out of God's thoughts. We read this morning, if your thoughts towards me, Lord, cannot be counted in order. If I tried to number them, they were more than I could count. I think it's verse 17 of that same chapter we read this morning. We read, "The Lord thinks upon me." So start with that. God has been thinking about you today. In fact, he hasn't stopped considering you. You've been in his mind and upon his thoughts. Isaiah declared of the Lord that he had inscribed on his palms your life, that you are marked in his heart. Pretty comforting thought, that he actively is involved in your life every step of the way. Isn't it wonderful to think that God always thinks about you? Now, the folks in captivity might very well feel like God abandoned them. If he loves us so much, where is he? Even though they had brought this on themselves, and sometimes you'll hear from people that have gotten away from the Lord, and then they'll say, where's God gone? And you want to go, well, he didn't move, you did. But he uses the word think and thought 3 times in one verse just to kind of emphasize the thought that he hasn't forgotten you at all. In fact, regardless of how it might look at the present moment, his actions towards you and his intentions for you are good and involved. He was thinking of them as they were traveling the 700 miles in POW caravans, thinking of them when they marched through strange streets with their hands tied behind them or chains around their neck, thinking about them when they heard strange languages and suffered the derision of the Babylonian people. They were captives now in a foreign place. God was thinking about them. All he was doing for them was a loving, purposeful action designed for their peace, not for their evil. But I'm sure that they were tempted to go, well, if that's true, look what we're going through. And that is usually the way that we respond when we don't understand what God is up to. But if you for a moment think that God is allowing things in your life that he shouldn't, read the verse again. In fact, stay for the 3rd service. Listen to it again. His actions are deliberate. They are motivated by his love for you and for your good. His mind goes with his hands, and his heart directs his actions. He's aware of the big picture and the minutest details. He knows the number of hairs on your head while overseeing the rising and falling of kingdoms of the world. Every affliction is measured and timed, every comfort precisely given, all of your circumstances ordered by the wisdom of a loving and thoughtful God. Never changes. Never changes. And you should know that about your life this morning. If you have given him your life, that even these in captivity due to their sin, who needed through chastisement to learn that worshiping an idol was not acceptable, even in this place, God had good thoughts towards them. So number 1, God always thinks about you, never forgets you. Second of all, only God knows his thoughts perfectly. And that's sometimes the trouble, isn't it? We try to understand what God is doing, and when we don't, we panic. Well, I don't get it. I don't know what he's up to. I don't know what he's doing. I thought he'd done something different. Isaiah would write in chapter 55, verse 8, the Lord saying very clearly, my thoughts are not your thoughts. My ways, not your ways. The heavens are as high above the earth, so my waves above your waves, and my thoughts beyond your thoughts. They are beyond your finding out. See, that's what we don't like. He's thinking about the great, but he better explain himself. And yet here he says, and we are told that there's no way we can fully understand what God is up to. But we can know this, he's thinking about us, and he's up to something good. What if God was up to something evil? What could you do about it? Except suffer it. Good thing to know he's all-powerful, all-knowing, and he's good. He's good. When Job was struggling through his suffering, he wrote in chapter 9, verse 10, he does great things that are beyond my finding out, wonders without number. If he goes by me, I don't see him. If he moves past, I don't perceive him. If he takes things away, who can hinder him? And how can I say to him, what are you doing? Well, you can't. I know the thoughts that I think, oh, the Lord knows, but you don't. But you know he's good, and you know that you're on his mind. Paul wrote to the Romans in chapter 11, that there was a depth to the riches of God's wisdom and knowledge, and his judgments were unsearchable, and they are beyond our finding out. You just don't understand God. So add to your understanding that his mind is upon you, that you really don't know what he's doing, but the comforting thing ought to be he knows what he's doing. Aren't you glad he knows what he's doing? His ways might look foolish to you, sometimes maybe downright neglectful. Where are you, Lord? But it's you that are going to have to change your perception and your conclusions just based on what the Bible tells us. Asaph wrote in Psalm 77, "Your ways are in the sea, your path in great waters, your footsteps are not known, and yet you lead us like a flock." Can't figure out what you're doing, but you're ahead of the pack and you're leading the way. Don't know where we're going, but we know we're going with you. We know we're following after you. Job wrote, again, Job chapter 26, "The pillars of heaven tremble and are astonished at your rebuke. You stir up the sea with your power. By his understanding, he can break up a storm. By his spirit, he ordains the heavens. His hand pierced the fleeing serpent. Indeed, these are just the mere edges of your ways. How small a whisper we hear of him, but the thunder of his power, who can understand it?" Job was in the same place. He didn't get it, but he knew God was powerful, and he was with him. Despite our ignorance of what God might be up to, know this: all is well when the Lord's in charge. I don't get it, but all is well when the Lord's in charge. Let the child, I think Moody said, let the child not trouble himself with things too great for him. Unbelief can have you misinterpreting God's will, making hasty judgments about his heart. They'll always produce the wrong conclusions, but the Lord knows his own thoughts, and he tells us they are good. So why do we struggle so much with resting in that? Maybe we just don't believe that. So, Moses said to the people there in Deuteronomy chapter 32, God is the rock, his ways are perfect. What? Perfect. Without flaw, without difficulty. His ways are perfect. So God thinks about you all the time, but you should know that you're not going to understand everything he does. His ways and his thoughts are known perfectly only to him. Here's the third thing. God's thoughts are definite, and they are defined, or they are settled, if you will. You know, man, we have trouble making up our minds. We see both sides of an issue. We're not sure which side to take. Well, is that righter than this one? Is that more profitable in the long run? We love discussions without decisions, but that's not the Lord. The Lord does something, and he never goes, oops, I should have thought about it. He doesn't look back today and go, I shouldn't have taken him down this road. We're going to change the whole plan. He doesn't change the flight plan. He knows what he's doing in your life from day one. His ways are settled, and they are definite for all of us. Job said in chapter 23 of the Lord, he is a unique God. Who can change him? He does whatever he wants. Well, that's the Lord. He has made up his mind. He knows the end from the beginning. This whole issue of taking the Bible to a level where, it's whatever you think it means, the old emerging church proposition, is just a big lie of the devil. God's word is sure. If it is up in the air and we don't really know, we're all in trouble. But that's not the God that we know from the Bible. He says and he means what he says. And he always has. He has resolved to never leave you. He's not going to go tomorrow except for you. I wasn't going to leave you, but did you see what you did yesterday? He has said he will never leave you or forsake you. He's promised to reward openly those who seek him diligently. He honors those who trust in him constantly. He promises to fulfill his covenant to us, to finish the work that he started, to keep his word. Count on it. Though you might waver in believing him or following him or serving him, he never wavers. I know the thoughts that I think towards you. They're thoughts of good. They're not of evil. They're thoughts of peace. When you are in the gloom, he's in the light. When it looks like the ways are closed, he's open for business. Moses is told to lead 2.5 million people out of the land of Egypt into a land that he would be shown, and his only job was stay close to the fire by day, the cloud by day and the fire by night. That was his entire job. Keep your eyes on the Lord, keep walking in the ways that he's going. He never once went, how am I going to feed 2.5 million people every day? That was God's problem. He just needed to keep on with God and keep his eyes upon the Lord. And even when they ended up between two mountains and the Red Sea, the people panicked. Moses wanted to have a discussion with the Lord. He was a bit dismayed, but God had a plan. I'm going to drown all the Egyptians. Well, if you could have told us that before, it would have been great. But he didn't. When the people had followed Jesus for a long time in the wilderness, and they were hungry and there was no 7-Eleven nearby, Jesus turned to Philip and said, hey, Philip, how are we going to feed all these people? And Philip immediately went to a math equation. He multiplied the number of people times what it would cost to feed them. He gave to the Lord a number. I figured it out. It's a big number. But John writes in John chapter 6, verse 6, the Lord asked Philip this to test him, comma, he already knew what he was going to do. God always knows what he's going to do because his ways are settled and they're definite. We read in Acts chapter 15, I think it's verse 18, known unto the Lord are all of his works from eternity. God doesn't change. Isn't it good? Thinks about you all the time. You don't understand what he's up to because he sees the whole picture, but his judgments you can depend upon. He's not hemming, he's not hawing, he's not changing his mind, he's not reading the latest poll, he's not going with the crowds. He's God. And he always knows what he's doing. And then you can add this to the equation. His thoughts towards you are that of peace, not of evil. Isn't it interesting that he tells you the positive, but then he adds the negative just to convince you? Thoughts of peace. Okay, not evil. All right. Could have said it the first time. Got a future and a hope for you in mind. So the next time the enemy comes by and he says to you, God's mad at you. He's going to punish you. He's vindictive. He's unforgiving. You can read him this verse. Quote it to him the next time he comes to visit. All that God thinks towards you are thoughts for your good. Now, you're in Babylon. You're there because of your own sin. You've been worshiping at these weird temples for years. And God said, this is good for you. And it's the old, this is going to hurt me more than it's going to hurt you thing. But if they're going to survive this, they're going to have to start to listen, because if the Lord had left them where they were, that idolatry would have destroyed them permanently. So God does what he does to be sure that you do what you need to do to stay with him. Maybe your road is extremely rough today. But if it is, I suspect if it were smooth, your feet would be slipping, and so God doesn't want you to slip. Well, it's so steep. Everything's an uphill battle. Well, maybe the Lord is bringing you up to a new level of fellowship. Oh, it's so, the road just descends. I feel like I'm falling off a cliff. Well, maybe you need to be brought to your knees. Whatever it is, his thoughts are good. His plans are definite. And they're thoughts for your benefit. In every way, his thoughts are for your good. I wrote in my Bible years ago, it is all about you when it comes to him, as long as it's all about him when it comes to you. You just got to have the Lord have your life. His motives are not always immediately clear because we're so nearsighted. He's the Alpha and the Omega. He's the beginning and the end. He sees the results long before we go, amen, Lord, that was a great idea. We may only feel the chisel and the blow of the hammer, but God's in process and our work is not done, but he's going to finish the work. He thinks about you all the time. But he's the only one that understands what he's up to. And to try to explain it to you would be worthless because you wouldn't get it. But the decisions that he has made are definite. They're not going to be changed or improved upon. And they are for your benefit, your peace, your future, your hope. So what should we do if that's the case? Well, if you believe God is acting with those motives in mind, then you should submit to him in everything in your life. Let him be the Lord. Why go, what are you doing? Told you it was for your good. Yeah, that was yesterday. And it's still true today. It should give you a willingness to submit your life to the Lord and to his capable hands. And it should make you hopeful. There's nothing worse than seeing down and out Christians whining about just about everything. How does that work? We're in the process of being taken by the Lord forward, not backward, and there's nothing to dread and everything to glory in, everything to anticipate. We should be excited about what's coming. Well, my life's been hard. Yeah, but if you have sunshine every day, that lasts long enough. They call that a drought. You don't want a drought. The Lord says here in verse 10, when the time comes, I will visit you and perform my good word to you and then return you to this place. God's promises are only as good as his word. But in the meantime, in your captivity, obey and wait, settle in, be a good example, pray for your captives, and God will do a great work. So the people had a choice: fight back, which you would think most people would do, devoid of a relationship with God, or submit and surrender. If you go back and read the first 10 verses of chapter 24, you do that on your own, the Lord gives to Jeremiah a vision that distinguishes between those that were willing to do what God said and surrender, and God would protect them and watch over them, and those who decided that fighting and violence and rebellion and all would be the way to go, and they would end up losing their life. Verse 11 is a wonderful promise. I hope you have that as your memory verse. If not, try it this week. God is thinking good thoughts about you, and he's got a plan. And if you'll notice, verse 12 and 13 and 14 are really just the outworking of that promise. As you rest in that, you can call upon the Lord and pray, and he's going to listen. When you seek him with your whole heart, you're going to find him, and he's going to deliver you and gather you and bless you and watch over you because you've called upon his name. I'm glad the Lord is thinking about me. Not to get even, but to get me where he wants me to be. You too. You too. Father, thank you this morning for your word to us. How good it is to know that, Lord, you are thinking about us, and how important that in our concept of who you are, in our outlook towards heaven, that factoring into the things we've learned, we learn that God is always thinking about us. We are always on his mind. We are the apple of his eye. We are the center of his concerns. And because, Lord, you have made a decision and we don't understand, the best we can do is submit ourselves and with great joy enjoy what you're doing, looking forward to what comes next. Rather than discouraged or depressed, we should be hopeful and excited. There is a future and a hope that you're developing. There can be a peace because we know that you know. Even when we don't know, you know. And we will rest in your heart towards us and in your love for us, that we would seek you with our whole heart. And may that be your peace this week. Busy times, holidays can be even more stressful. Families sometimes don't even make that easier, makes it harder. But our God has you in mind, and he is working in your life those things that will bring you peace and a hope. Know that today. Don't forget that tomorrow. Jeremiah 29, verse 11, your verse for the week. Don't forget it.